It's arguably one of the most iconic sci-fi worlds ever written, and certainly one of the most iconic sci-fi writers. Isaac Asimov's Foundation is now a video game in the form of Journey to Foundation. What's more, it features a list of very well-known voice actors such as Jennifer Howell and Francois Chow.
Imperium has kept the peace for 12,000 years.
And as you might expect from such a complicated world, Journey to Foundation is heavily narrative-driven. Here's a look then at what you can expect from the game. Now, the title is available on PSVR 2, which is the version I'm playing at right here. It's also available for the MetaQuest as well as the Pico headset. And also, just so you know, this video was sponsored by the developers Arcade. Now, I went into Journey to Foundation not at all sure what to expect from the title. After all, a lot of standalone VR games found on the smaller headset, shall we say, are not always that in depth or that complicated. But what I found here was definitely a game that had a lot of story and, well, quite a lot of mechanics to go along with it. And it's definitely a game that takes full advantage of being immersed in the game world, although from time to time that was something that just kept throwing me. Right here I had to raise my hands, and the guy got a little bit annoyed with me because I didn't raise them quite high enough to trigger the next part of the cutscene. But this just goes to show that being inside of a game is very different to sitting there with a controller or a mouse and keyboard. And this is something that the developers seem to be very aware of and very conscious of, as throughout the game I found myself really immersed in the ongoing story and the ongoing narrative, the whole environment in fact. And this was especially true when it comes to interacting with some of the characters here. You see, Foundation comes with space telepathy, officially known in the world as Mentalics. That means that you can read some of these NPCs' minds. Check this out. Yeah, these characters are not too happy. And this opens up a whole new line of dialogue, allowing you to progress the story in slightly different ways to you otherwise might have done. What's even more neat is that you can listen in on their thoughts. And yeah, it's kinda neat that you can do that by twisting your hand like some sort of space wizard. It's a technique you'll use again and again throughout the game, which is pretty good actually, because there's nothing quite like getting inside of someone's head.
I need to destroy that capsule before the agent finds it.
But in case you're wondering if the game is all smarts and no action, well, the thing is, there's plenty of action. And shooting in VR is always something I find quite fun, although I found myself dying a fair few times as well. And that's not necessarily a case of finding the game extremely difficult, but rather it's a case of finding the right way to approach each individual scenario. In some cases then, that meant hiding behind crates and sniping the opponents until, well, they were good and dead and just completely gone. Other times it was good enough to walk down the corridors, Terminator style, taking out the enemies one by one. Although, on these occasions I did have to watch the health, as afterwards I was, well, a little drained, shall we say. So in the end, and this may just have been me, but I found there was no real one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to combat. Fortunately, when you do die, if you're killed, you're never sent back too far, usually just to the most recent checkpoint. That actually brings up another point that's worth mentioning. You can't manually save in this game. Instead, it auto-saves, tracking your progress as you go. And this is pretty important as your decisions throughout the game do have long-term consequences. And consequences is something that's very fitting when it comes to the idea of Foundation. The plot surrounds the events of an impending collapse of the galactic civilization, the Galactic Imperium. The result of this collapse is that humanity will enter a dark age that will last for 30,000 years. But thankfully, a mathematician by the name of Harry Seldon has developed a plan that will reduce this down to 1,000 years. That's not good by any means, but, well, I guess it's much better. The mathematics for this plan are known as psychohistory, and the equations are stored in this device right here, the prime radiant. Now, I don't want to spoil this too much because it's a big part of the story, but I do want to show this particular aspect. This is the entire future history of the galactic civilization, and yes, you can interact with it. I think anyone who's familiar with the books or the TV series, two very different ways of showing all of this, are going to be pretty interested in actually getting to engage with that. And what's more, it's not the only visually interesting set piece. Throughout the game you'll discover a whole variety of different locations which provide for some very visually interesting areas. It's something I found really, nice to see actually, that the developers have managed to push the relatively limited hardware specs found in the VR headsets. But talking of VR, the game, as I said, does make fantastic use of this, and that includes many of the puzzles and solutions to actually navigate your way around the game. Sometimes that might involve picking up items, other times pressing buttons or turning dials. In some ways this might sound extremely basic, but the fact is that when you're in the VR environment, interacting with the world in this way feels very, very immersive, and it really does help that sense of actually feeling present in the game. It's kind of a very different way to actually approach these games, but anyone who's familiar with VR will be quite aware of that as well. So yeah, it certainly keeps things engaging, as the solutions to many of the problems, or the solution to making progress through the game, is based on the same sort of ways you'll do it in real life. It all adds to that sensation of actually being inside the world rather than just playing a game. There's also a variety of different tools that can help accomplish these things, such as the welding arc tool, or the little blowtorch here that helps you melt off the bolts to get into various hatches or different doorways that otherwise would be non-enterable. In case though you prefer more gamified type interactions with the world, that is also present, and there's one very nice one in the form of the hacking puzzles. This allows you to get into locked off areas. This is really nice little minigame actually, and what's more, it's one that grows in complexity as you make your way through the game. The idea then is to connect the different coloured nodes together. In this case we've just connected the orange one, and we also have to connect the yellow one. The catch is that the coloured lines cannot cross each other, and you can't pass this line through any of the darker coloured nodes. And there we go, that's one puzzle solved. Whilst some of these may look a little bit on the easy side to you, that does change as you progress through the game. As said, they do grow in complexity, and soon you'll find yourself connecting multiple colours here, and that's not always quite so straightforward, but there we go nonetheless. Puzzles are also multi-stepped. We've got a little code hidden at the back of that door, which is the code for the keypad here. I think I must have had the fat fingers there, because I'm sure I'm typing 36, which is the start of the number there, and I tried again here second time, and we got in just fine. So much like the real world, fat fingers pressing too many buttons at the same time. The game then seems to provide a nice balance between the more intellectual type of activities like solving those puzzles and the various dialogue options, and then a nice mix of action orientated events as well. The climbing can be particularly daunting, as in VR some of those heights, let's say if you suffer from vertigo, you may not want to look down, or I guess up. Overall then, Journey to Foundation achieved what many VR games failed to actually achieve. It placed me in a whole variety of different situations and pulled me along through an ongoing narrative. Whilst this is certainly something you see in the massive big-budget AAA titles, it's not something you often find on the smaller self-contained VR headsets such as the MetaQuest. It also incidentally has a few nice features for the PSVR 2, which includes eye tracking. This generally allows you to interact with the game simply using your eyes for certain elements, such as choosing your dialogue options or letting other characters know what you're looking at. Ultimately though, what really pulled me through Journey to Foundation was undoubtedly the story. Now, we could sit here all day and discuss the various different gameplay elements, from the graphics to the combat to the puzzles to the environments, and they all do gel together very nicely. But the one thing for me that really made me want to see more was indeed the story. Journey to Foundation then is an extremely heavy narrative-driven game. In fact, so much so that the developers directly asked me not to spoil that story by including too much of it in the video right here. And you know what, I'm actually okay with that, because as with all good stories, you don't want to have that spoiled before you, get to experience it for yourself. Actually, one other thing I'd like to show off here that is included in the game, and it forms a part of the story. You get to interact with the Encyclopedia Galactica every time you complete a chapter. This gives you the background lore to some of the characters, to the various factions, as well as much of the other story aspects of the Foundation universe. But that story will change depending on how you actually play it out. For example, some of the character stuff there for Dex is going to be very different depending on the choices you actually made yourself. If all this sounds at all interesting to you, do check out those links in the video description. Again, my thanks to Archaeet for sponsoring this video. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.